From the newsrooms of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, this is Please Explain. I'm Samantha Selinger-Morris. It's Thursday, October 19. It is, say many, the most complicated hostage-taking situation in recent memory. When Hamas first attacked Israel nearly 2 weeks ago, it took what was believed to be around 100 hostages, men, women, and children, many snatched from their beds. Now, the Israeli government says the number stands at more like 199 hostages. Their loved ones wait in anguish for any news. Are they dead or alive? They frantically post photographs and details about them on social media and hold photos of them at demonstrations. Israelis have begun to beg their government to bring them home. Today, former Australian Army officer and Middle East analyst Rodger Shanahan on the unique challenge the Israeli Defense Force faces in attempting to rescue the hostages. Rodger, to begin with, I'm hoping you could start by introducing yourself. Tell us a bit about your background and who you are.
I was an Army officer for about 26 years and developed an interest in the Middle East during that time, largely as a result of being posted with the United Nations into Syria and South Lebanon in the mid-90s. It piqued my interest and I started gaining academic qualifications. I did 2 masters at the Australian National University and then I did a PhD in Shia political development. I ended up being posted to the Australian embassies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE as a defence attaché, and after I left the military, I continued to pursue an academic career in the Middle East, and as we all know, the Middle East may go out of favour now and then, but something always happens.
Okay, and we really wanted to speak to you today because you do have unique insight into what is playing out in the region right now. So I'm interested, Rodger, what was your first thought when you heard that Hamas had invaded Israel's border and taken scores of people hostage?
By now we're all used to small-scale incursions across the border, be it into Israel from Palestinian territories or in the north through southern Lebanon. But the sheer scale of what occurred on that day and the apparent ease with which they were able to breach the Israeli defences in multiple points, and then with lightly armed people, massacre 1,300 Israelis, and the lack of speed with which the Israelis responded, and all of this happening on the day after the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. It took quite a while to try and understand what happened, and I think we're still trying to work out how it came to be. It also presents such a unique problem for the Israeli government. The sheer number, Hamas announced the other day that they had between 200 and 250 hostages. I think when we saw social media images of hostages being taken, we were probably thinking a handful of hostages would have been taken back. I don't think anybody could have foreseen the sheer scale of this hostage taking. It's unprecedented.
And can you tell us about the hostages? We obviously don't know who all of them are, but of those we do know of, who are they and what do we know about them?
Yeah, listen, there's a big grab bag of people who were taken, and it probably says something about a lack of coordination amongst the attackers about who they took. In some instances, military bases and security bases were overrun, and there are some military personnel, and we keep on being told a couple of senior military figures were taken. We also by now know about the tragic concert that was overrun and hundreds of people killed, but also a number of other innocent civilians who were taken hostage there, and also the kibbutzes and other settlements of Israelis going about their daily business who are also taken.
And Rodger, I wanted to ask you about some of the tactics that Hamas is using now, because it's been reported that Hamas has hacked into the social media accounts of some of the people they've taken hostage. And in some cases, Hamas then live streamed the October 7 attacks and the kidnappings on the social media accounts of the people who'd actually been taken. What do you know about that?
There are reports about this, but I suppose those kind of things are to be expected in this interconnected world. Groups like Hamas want to increase the shock value of what they're doing by showing that they can exploit social media in this way. It gives an immediacy to what they're doing. It also reinforces in people's minds the kind of helplessness that they may be experiencing, because ultimately a government is supposed to guarantee the security of its population. And if aggressors are not able only to breach the defences, to take hostages, but also to live stream elements of it. It just reinforces the strength of the attackers and the weakness of the defenders, in this case the Israeli government. But it's unclear at the moment whether this was opportunities that present themselves to individuals or part of a concerted information operations campaign on the part of Hamas.
Do we know much about where the hostages are being kept and what condition they're in?
No, listen, there's been very little on that other than reassurances by Hamas that they'll be taken care of in accordance with Islamic customs. And a few days ago, we saw for the first time video of a hostage that showed them having what looked like a broken arm being attended to.
More on the hostage situation. Hamas has reportedly released its first video of an Israeli hostage held in Gaza. The video is believed to show 21-year-old Mia Shem, who is understood to have been abducted from an outdoor music festival. She says she received medical attention.
That's the first one that we've seen, but it would be pretty apparent that Hamas would try and dilute these hostages amongst the various places within Gaza because there's some kind of guarantee and a bargaining chip for Hamas in the future. You want to make it as difficult as possible for the Israelis or other people to recover them, and you also want to probably put them in areas close to high-value targets, so you try and dissuade Israel from prosecuting those targets to the full extent. So they'd be dispersed, they'd be difficult to access, and it's probably the key problem facing the Israeli government now, how to get them back when they've been dispersed.
So, Rodger, how has Israel responded to hostage situations in the past, and how might this time be different?
Well, the Israeli position is normally to try and recover the hostages, so kill the kidnappers and recover the hostage. That's a difficult thing to do, and we saw previously Gilad Shalit was captured. There were attempts made to recover him.
Israeli conscript Gilad Shalit was just 19 when he was kidnapped by Hamas militants and spirited into Gaza. Today, Israel bought his freedom with the release of more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners.
The taste of freedom here is bittersweet. For in Gaza, the Palestinians were also rejoicing in their hundreds of thousands as Israel pardoned and released.
There's one line of argument that while Hamas generally thought that they were going to be able to take some prisoners and exchange them for Palestinians held in Israeli prisons, and that may even extend to the reason why they took women and children, because there are minors and women held in Israeli prisons. The sheer scale of the numbers of people makes it hard to fathom that this was centrally directed. Perhaps they just were so successful in breaching Israeli defences that everybody took hostages and they ended up with 200 or 250 of those hostages. But the problem, obviously, for the Israeli government is the highest political priority has to be the recovery of the hostages. But that political priority is at odds with the military priority, which is to essentially destroy Hamas, and that will require heavy use of ground forces and quite bloody urban warfare. That is complete opposite environment that you want to exist when you're trying to recover the hostages. So the Palestinians have already said that about 22 of these hostages have been killed, allegedly in Israeli airstrikes. We don't know the truth of that at all. But that still leaves over 150 hostages that are dispersed, and some of whom are foreign nationals, and it will remain Israel's first priority to recover them. But I think realistically, it would be virtually impossible to recover everybody who's left.
Right, and we know that Israel does have a long history of prioritising the lives of its citizens who have been taken hostage. And of course, like we've been talking about, there's possibly hundreds of hostages here. So do you think that is changing the calculations that the government is making?
Yeah, listen, I think they're going to have to approach this problem quite differently to what they've done before. We'd now be at a very, very urgent information gathering stage. You can't address the problem until you know what the problem is, and the essence of this problem is, where are the hostages? How dispersed are they? How realistic is it for us to recover any of them? Is there only one way to do this? The Israeli government might try and recover as many of the hostages as they can in preliminary operations before the major ground force invasion happens. They might also think about exchanging some low-level prisoners held in Israeli prisons for perhaps some of the women and children held by Hamas. But there are going to be some of those prisoners who are particularly the high-value prisoners to the Palestinians who are going to be exceptionally hard to get, and I don't think waiting to release them is going to stop the launch of the ground assault. So there will still be hostages held at the outset of the ground campaign, I fear.
And what about other governments around the world? Because there are other foreign nationals also being held hostage by Hamas.
Yeah, it's a very interesting one as well. It's been publicly stated, particularly American citizens who are held amongst these groups, but there's also citizens from Asian countries. And Hamas released an announcement which was a bit peculiar in its wording, saying that they didn't have time to check who is who, and so they took foreign nationals by mistake, but yet they've made no attempt to hand over those foreign nationals. If it was a mistake, then surely you would just hand them over. So to Hamas, they're bargaining chips, and it doesn't really matter who they are. But it does matter to the outside world, because while Israel is responsible for recovering those hostages, I'm sure they're going to get a significant amount of help from other nationals' militaries in intelligence support, planning support, because each country is obviously responsible for the recovery of its individuals, even if it's carried out by the Israeli military. So I think at the end of the day, it was just another strategic error by Hamas. But I think they understand that the value of foreign citizens is probably in some ways greater than Israeli citizens, because it might help them have foreign governments put some kind of restraints on the Israeli ground manoeuvre and the air campaign.
And finally, Rodger, I understand that Israeli families have created their own informal groups to publicise the details about their missing relatives. There have been posters hung up in cities around the world with the faces of those who've been kidnapped. So how do you think public pressure will feed into the way that the government chooses to respond to this issue? And what hope do you have for the hostages being held?
Yeah, listen, it's a really devilish problem for the Israeli military. You can't hold off the ground campaign forever, but you don't want to do it so quickly that it's going to precipitate the deaths of the hostages. It's obviously going to be one of, if not the primary aim for the Israeli government to recover as many of these hostages as possible. Their families are obviously putting pressure on because they want their loved ones back. But as you said at the start, the political priority to recover the hostages is at odds with the military priority, which is to destroy Hamas. And you can try and achieve that first political aim, and I think there will be preliminary operations to try and recover those before the ground forces go in, but you're not going to recover them all before the advance of the ground campaign. So I think tragically, while Hamas has said that there's 22 hostages have already been killed, I think there's going to be more, and the Israeli government and other governments are probably realistic about that. They could never say that, but I think just the sheer difficulty of trying to locate them all precludes them from all being saved, and it's going to be yet another tragedy of this brutal Gaza campaign.
It's unfortunate we have to have this conversation, Rodger, but thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Today's episode of Please Explain was produced by Tammy Mills. Our executive producer is Ruby Schwartz. Please Explain is a production of The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. If you enjoy this show and want more of our journalism, subscribe to our newspapers today. It's the best way to support what we do. Search The Age or smh.com.au/subscribe. I'm Samantha Selinger Morris. This is Please Explain. Thanks for listening.